snowy day in Denver, Colorado. And we want to welcome you all to the African Leadership Group weekly update. Today we have a very important guest, a friend of the community that I'll be introducing. But also we have another guest that came all the way from Maryland. We have Andrew Hakiza that really, while he was here visiting in Colorado, wanted to stop by and visit with the African Leadership Group. So in honor of him, we're going to be playing a song from Uganda. So for our Ugandan friend, we're going to be dancing and moving with the Ugandan beat. Amadou, are we ready for that song? So Amadou, what is the name of that singer? You gotta tell us who's the singer from Uganda.
All right, the song is called Buganda.
Buganda.
The homeland traditional music.
Okay, Buganda, the homeland traditional music of Uganda. So we send our love and gratitude to everybody from Uganda, and hope that everybody is doing well back home. But as you know, every week we honor countries based on the song. Just to let you know that the African Leadership Group, that's how inclusive we are as an organization. This is not only for African, but this is for human being, and you will get to hear a little bit more based on the guests we have today. So thank you, Amadou. Amadou is doing the move, so thank you. Andrew, welcome. We are truly a pleasure to have you and look forward to partnering with you, and hopefully soon we'll have you in front of the camera, so our community will get to hear from you.
Sure, thank you.
But as you know, this year has been one of those years. But at the same time,
2020, what a year.
Yes. But at the same time, it's a year that's extremely important because of the election. And there is nothing more valuable, nothing more important than having the possibility to cast your vote, and especially to make it count. But what we wanted to do today, and I'll introduce our guests here shortly, but what we wanted to do today and really try to create a platform where we can help you understand what you're casting your vote for. Because I know when you get the ballot, there's a lot of information on the ballot, and sometimes I know I don't know a lot about those ballots. So we're going to try to really help you understand, what you're voting for. And again, I always want to remind everybody, as a non-profit organization, as an organization, we are not partisan, we're not Democrat, we're not Republican. We are here for the best of the community. And that's why we always want to bring resources and valuable information to make sure that the community are well positioned to make the choice based on what fit them best. So with that said, so we have a friend, honestly. Senator Lundeen, it's truly an honor to have you here. And you've been a long-time friend of the African Leadership Group. You have been to many events as a speaker, as a panelist, always looking to partner and collaborate. So just know that we appreciate you, and you are making us better as a community because of your knowledge.
You make us all better. You and ALG make such a difference in what we're all trying to do. You and I were talking earlier, and I was explaining my experience as an exchange student. At 16 years old, I went to live in a foreign country. And I learned so much. I learned so many things living in that foreign country. But one thing I learned is that we are the same person 5 years from today that we are today, except for the people we meet, the books we read, and the cultures that we engage with. And when we begin to engage and understand other people, we begin to understand how alike we all are. And sure, we have differences of perspectives. Think about it. Your brother, sister, we fight within the family.
That's true.
We have struggles, we have give and take. But at the end of the day, we all are looking for the same thing. If you cut me, do I not bleed red? If I cut you, do you not bleed red? The reality is, if I'm hurt and my feelings are hurt, it's the same as if your feelings are hurt. We are so much alike. And so from that perspective of commonality is what I try and do with everything that I do in public service, is because we are all here in the human condition trying to find our ways, and sometimes we can help each other do that. So I appreciate the way you speak into my life and help me find a better way forward. So, Papa, it's a pleasure to be with you.
Well, thank you. And what a better way to start our show. And if you happen to be watching and you hear what the senator just said, and you happen to be an alumni of the public speaking class, that's the same thing you hear the Professor Madiama say all the time. The only difference between the person you are today and the person you will become tomorrow is the person you meet and the book you read.
That's correct.
That's one thing that Professor Madiama always said, and that's what
The professor and I are in exact alignment on that.
Yes,
I
yes.
say that at least once a month. You will
Yes.
be the same 5 years from today that you are today, except for the people you meet and the books you read.
Exactly. So let's start, Senator, by you introducing the community, yourself to the community, giving a little bit of background,
Sure.
party affiliation, things like that, please.
Sure, absolutely. So I like to tell people that my professional life is like a three-legged stool. But before you get to my professional life, I like to talk a little bit about my personal life. I have 2 adult children, and they're both married, and I have 2 grandchildren from my daughter and 1 grandchild on the way from my daughter-in-law. My son and my daughter-in-law are now pregnant, so I'll have 3 grandkids. And,
Oh, wow.
and I am so grateful for that. My family is so very, very important to me. But my professional life is a three-legged stool, is what I like to say. First, I was a working journalist for a number of years, and I had the opportunity to work across the country and ultimately in Washington, D.C. a long, long time ago, back before there was Facebook, before social media, any of this. And that was a really interesting career for me. And then after that, I worked for a number of years as an entrepreneur of small companies, built up a number of companies. The biggest company was 10 companies over about 28 years. The biggest company had 150 employees at its peak, so very small companies, micro companies. And then about 11 years ago, I got involved in politics, which is kind of that third leg of my professional stool. And why I got involved in politics was at the time we were coming through the Great Recession. I mean, this COVID crisis, this COVID recession has shaken us to our foundation. Prior to that, in 2008, 2009, we had this recession that just shook us to our core. And I said, don't worry. In America, we are spectacular about solving today's problems
Yes.
with tomorrow's ideas.
Yes.
But you really need an educated and involved and trained workforce in order to do that. People need to do that. And how do you get that? You get that through education.
That's true.
And so I got involved. I was recruited to run for the State Board of Education, got involved and served on the State Board of Education for 4 years. While there, I realized all the policies were coming from the legislature, the state assembly, the Senate and the House. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to run for that. So I spent 4 years in the House, and now I'm in the Senate. And education has been the theme that I've worked diligently to try and improve, making education more personal, to meet students where they are. You know, every student is a precious individual, and we can change that individual's life through education, and we can transform society through education. What could be more important than education? The answer is nothing.
Yep.
And so education has always been the hallmark. So that was probably more than you were looking for, but that is kind of a sample, an example of why I'm in policy, why I'm in politics, and why I'm sitting here with you. So
Well,
it's an honor to be here.
I mean, thank you so much for that introduction. And as an organization also, as you know, we are a believer in education. And as an organization, we focus on 3 areas: social impact, economic impact, and educational impact. We'll have you back here to talk more
education.
about
I would love
education.
to do that.
And now, I want to start with, as a society, as a community, we all have the feeling that we are divided more than ever. So I want to hear from you as a politician, as somebody involved in the state of Colorado policy. What is your sentiment being at the state capitol?
Sure.
Is it unified? Is it divided as we feel it from the outside?
You know, there are moments that are pulling us together. There are moments that are tearing us apart. And I think we each need to step up in the sphere of influence we have. My personal perspective is, and I took this from a book I read. Remember our comments about you'll be the same person 5 years from today you are today, except for the books you read and the people you meet. In a book I read something that said, seek first to understand, then to be understood. And I've discovered that when I apply that philosophy, the conversations go a whole lot better. When I start out, like my grandmother said, Paul, the good Lord gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth. Use them in those proportions. When I listen carefully, when I seek first to understand, and then I say, okay, I understand. Now here's my response, here's my perspective, the conversation goes a lot better. When we all do that, I think we find ourselves in a much better place. And I will tell you, there are times under the Gold Dome, Republicans and Democrats, when we do that. Those are the moments when we are finding our better selves, and we are, quite frankly, forming better policy for the people of Colorado. We don't always do that, however. And sometimes outside the building, especially in this season of politics, where every time you turn the TV on, you see nothing but ads that are negative and tearing down another candidate, we lose sight of that. But the reality is, I believe we can call ourselves to that better response, seeking first to understand, then to be understood. And that is when things go better. So we can get there, and there are moments. The glimmers of hope there are many, many moments where Republicans and Democrats do, in fact, interact positively with each other. It's about understanding first, and then we can find solutions. Common sense solutions are a big part of my deal. Okay, so I understand the problem. Now can we find a common sense solution becomes my request.
So, and thank you. And we will dive deep into the ballot here shortly, but I just want to kind of lay the groundwork when it comes to community perspective.
Sure.
How we see our elected officials, how we perceive them based on TV, reality, and things like that.
Sure.
Now, as community members, as citizens of the United States, what can we do to hold the elected official accountable when it comes to coming together for the betterness of the country?
Reach out. At my level, so I serve in the state Senate. There's 35 state senators, 65 state representatives in the House. We're very accessible. We're all visible on Google. You can see us on the website. You can interact with us. And I encourage people to do just that. Reach out and communicate via email, call. We all have office numbers that are published. My cell phone's on my website, so you can get directly to me. I tell people, here's my cell number, use it, don't abuse it, and people honor that. They reach out. So I will tell you that there's a lot of advocates. There are people, and we're going to talk about a number of these initiatives. There are big dollars being invested pushing one way or pushing another, but the most effective advocates, in my opinion, aren't those big dollars that are being spent. It's the individual from my community that reaches out to me and says, hey, Senator Lundeen, or more likely they say, hey, Paul, I read this, I saw this, here's what my perspective is on that. Always glad to hear that. That is the most effective advocacy, when somebody who's taken the time, as we have done, to develop a bit of a relationship, picks up the phone and says, hey, let's think this through, let's talk this through. I would like to be understood, and I would like to understand your perspective. That's when we gain the most ground.
So now, Senator, and I know you have a lot of friends from the Democratic Party.
I do.
And I know you work.
They don't vote for me all the time, but they like me.
Yeah, and I know you work very well. So could you tell our viewers, because most of the time we hear far right, far left, could you tell our viewers what is your position when it comes to that? Are you somebody that always willing to work with both sides, or are you somebody that's leaning more on one side?
Sure. I believe that principles that are sustainable, that values that are timeless and immutable, that's what we should lean into. I also believe that it's critically important that we help people who are in a challenging spot, in their life. People who choose not to be helped, people who are backing away from or wanting more than an opportunity, sometimes that's difficult to interact with. But I believe we should be principled in our interactions and sensitive. I mean, I am animated by my faith is a large part of what drives me. And the reality is, I think if the creator of the universe sees every individual as a precious human being, that should be my responsibility to see every individual as a precious human being also. So that is the prime filter. Mm-hmm. Then the question becomes, can we get a common sense solution? Is there a solution where we don't have to create a bureaucracy in order to allow things to unfold well between individuals, or to help people achieve a path forward? Then that would be my preferred pathway. If at the end of the day, the only way to help people advance through a challenge is to involve government in the solution, then I slowly but surely will be willing to involve government in the solution. Because my perspective is that when you allow people to interact freely, it's Adam Smith and the unseen hand, a willing buyer and a willing seller. It's an informed, enlightened self-interest on my behalf, enlightened self-interest on your behalf. We come together in what's commonly known as a marketplace, or a relationship is another way to describe it, and we do something that benefits you and benefits me. It's a win-win. That's far better than government saying, here's the rule, here's the law, live with it or don't live with it. So that's the way I tend to try and approach it. Common sense is the core driver in all that. And here my phone's shaking in my pocket. Here I'm going to tell my phone to stop shaking in my pocket.
Sure. Yes, and if you just following us online, you're welcome to the African Leadership Group Weekly Update, and we have the Senator Paul Lundeen here, and we just started by putting the framework and his belief, his affiliation, and his position. And today we're going to talk about what we have on the ballot. So we would not start talking about it without mentioning the presidential election.
Oh boy.
Obviously, we want everybody to decide who they're going to vote for based on what they believe. And if you are watching the show and you are a Democrat, you are an elected official, we'd love to have you. This is a platform that's open to anybody. Now, we have the upcoming presidential election, and we watched the first debate. And obviously,
Was that a debate?
there was a lot of concern.
That was
So,
that's a head shaker.
yes,
what that was.
and the community was just discouraged and looking at two people that are seeking to be the leader of the free world to behave and act that way. So, and we recently also saw the second debate. So, what is your take on watching the first debate and the second debate, and when it comes to those two candidates that we have? What information could you share with our viewers when it comes to that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, Papa, that's a great framing. The glimmer of hope, the ray of light, is the difference between the first debate and the second debate. The first debate was a head shaker. I don't know anyone that watched that and said, wow, I feel great about the future of my country. It was challenging. I don't think either candidate really got to square on their feet and advance their platform. It was just kind of a brawl is what it was. The second debate, in my opinion, was a much better exposition of the various perspectives. And they have very distinct perspectives. And some of those things came out. I mean, it's wonderful when you can get politicians to be candid and say specifically, here's my perspective. And we saw a little bit of that in the second debate. So I thought that was a great move forward. And tragically, we lost the middle debate. The second debate was actually the third debate. The second debate got canceled, so we lost a debate that would have been, I think, beneficial for people to see those candidates and what they had to say.
Yeah, great. So, and the other thing I want to talk about now, we know we have the federal election, we have the local election. I would like for you, if you can, to just break it down for our viewers to know what is relevant at the federal level and how, and what's relevant at the local level and how, based on where they live and what they receive on the ballot.
Absolutely. And so there's really three levels on everybody's ballot. And there's different batches of things you see in your ballot. But there's federal, which is the presidential race, and the U.S. Senate race here in Colorado. Cory Gardner and the former governor, Hickenlooper, are in that race. So that's federal. And that's who's going to elect us and do the work in Washington, D.C. Then there's a lot of state issues, some state candidates. There's certainly a state House member in your neighborhood. There may be a state Senate member in your neighborhood that's running. So there's state level. And then there's a whole bunch of state initiatives. You probably got they call this the Blue Book. It's all of the ballot initiatives, some of which are changes to the Constitution of Colorado, and some of which are changes to the laws, the statutes of Colorado. And so there's a whole bunch of state issues on the ballot. And then there's local things too. Your local school district, your local fire district, your municipality, your city may have something on the ballot saying, we're voting for even county commissioners. So there's local issues as well. So federal, state, and local. There's a whole bunch. But the biggest portion of that ballot is the state issues. There's a whole bunch of initiatives and proposals and amendments.
Yes, and we'll talk about the state issue, but as you hear the senator just said, we have the federal, and for some of you, you hear that we have Senator Cory Gardner and the former Governor Hickenlooper that's running for the Senate, and federal, and you have the Congress. In my district, I have Congressman Jason Crow and Steve House running, and depending on where you live. So those are, people that's going to be representing you at Washington at the Congress level. But we also have the state Senate and all the things that's going to be happening legally. Locally here in the state.
State level, and then there's local too, like the city of Aurora may have some initiatives on the ballot as well. So
now, if you want to learn more about it, reach out to the African Leadership Group. We'll be more than happy to share with you Senator Lundeen contact information, get a hold of the Blue Book, and just to help you educate you and understand more everything that's on the ballot for you to cast your vote properly.
Absolutely. So for people that want, and we can provide this information also, but it's, if you go to LEG, which is short for legislature, leg.colorado.gov/bluebook, it will give you this document, which has all the information about all the statewide initiatives. So if you didn't get one in the mail or you lost it, you can always get this information online. Or you can just Google Colorado Blue Book 2020, and you get a copy of this document.
Yeah, and it wouldn't be fair for me as somebody that served on the education board at the state not to seize this opportunity to talk about education and all the challenge that we are facing currently with our kids' education. So I want to ask you, is there anything on the ballot legislative that talk about education that the viewers should be informed about and be aware before they cast their vote?
Sure. Well, to the question of education policy, there really aren't any education policy initiatives on the ballot. For instance, I wish right now we were considering an initiative that would give all parents the authority to spend the money on behalf of their children the way that would best serve their child. So big policy questions like that, which I think, quite frankly, the way it's all set up now, it tends to serve the system first. And then the system says, hey, we've got all these education services we want you to partake in. I hope they fit for your child. They may not, but we want you to come get that. I wish we were looking at something that said, Papa, I think you should have authority. For instance, during this time of COVID, a lot of parents are banding together. They're forming pods. They're forming tutoring collectives to help their children navigate through the challenges they've got where they may be in school, they may not be in school. I wish we had something where we could respond to that. So there's nothing of that nature on the ballot. Okay. But there are some issues on the ballot that are tax increases. Okay. And of course, whenever there's a tax increase, when you're selling a tax increase, you want to make it as palatable as possible. And the best way to make something sound like a great idea is to be able to say, and it's for the kids. So there's, for instance, Proposition EE. Which is a tax increase on nicotine products. It's a 300% increase in the taxes on cigarettes, tobacco, vaping products, things of that nature. They will argue that it's an education initiative because they will say, well, we'll spend some of the money on education. The challenge is, hang on to your wallet, because how it gets spent, will it really get spent in a way that supports my child or the children in my neighborhood or not? That's an open question, unknown. But some people will be saying, oh, no, Proposition EE is about education. I would argue now it's not actually about education. It's about increasing the taxes on cigarettes by 300%, which, as a matter of public health, maybe you want to make cigarettes so expensive that people stop buying them. But I would say that's probably not the best way to approach it. That's my perspective.
Yes. And I want to go back to the pandemic pod and the tutoring.
Sure.
And with your background serving on the Board of Education, we've been hearing that there are some districts that are against the pandemic pod and against maybe parents that are just figuring out a way to serve their children when it comes to having access to the best education. So what is your take on that?
Sure. It's difficult for the school districts we have, for the schools we have. They've got a business model. They're used to doing business a specific way. And COVID shows up and it just kicked over the table.
Sure.
It completely said, you know what, that idea of putting 30 kids in a classroom, sitting 3 feet apart from each other and sneezing and coughing on each other, probably not such a great idea right now.
Sure.
So you've got to change your model. Or maybe you should actually do it from home. So it was a complete shift in the business model of public education. Well, what many parents did was they said, well, I don't want my child to lose a year of education.
Yep.
I'm going to band together with some neighbors down here and some neighbors over there, and we're going to create a pod. We're going to do the work we need to do to support our child as that child is having partially in-person learning at the school for a day or two a week and partially online learning. We want to make sure our child doesn't lose ground. And so they're forming responses. And it's beautiful. I love it when things like that happen. It's the organic growth that comes from parents who care more about their kids than anybody else on the planet possibly could. And they say, here's our response. This is what we want to do. And so they're rising up. The challenge is this. Parents that are affluent, that maybe, there's two parents in the household, one makes a big salary and the other stays home and works to, support the kids. They don't have a difficulty in this circumstance.
Sure.
They can form a pod because they've got one adult helping support that and make it happen. My argument is we need to give all students
to have access to
an opportunity to have access to that kind of support. You know, if it's a single mom or a single dad who's trying to work and trying to support the child at the same time, the resources that we're pouring, and we spend $13 billion a year, all sources, all in public education in Colorado. That money should be going to those parents so that they can spend it in a way that supports their child in the way that they know best. And there may be some coaching needed. We need to think smartly about how we support that effort so that it really, truly does serve the child well. But we need to be willing to look at things differently. And we need to start by looking at how we spend the money, the funding of public education differently. And that is when we make that change, the parents of Colorado will have authority over the system, and the students of Colorado will be brilliantly and far better served.
Yep. And you know, that's one thing that the African Leadership Group believe in, and we did exactly what Senator mentioned. We have a pandemic pod that we created here, where parents that have to be at work can drop off their kids here. At
right here in this building, right where we're recording this. Yeah.
Right here, they can drop off their kids Monday through Thursday from 7:30 to 4:30, and on top of that, we are providing a tutoring program. The reason we are doing that because we recognize that most of our kids are falling behind. This online online schooling is not just working for them. And as an organization, we are always solution oriented. We don't sit on the sideline and wait for people to solve our issue. We are the first one to take initiative to address those.
I completely agree with that. A common sense solution to the challenge we have. And one of the big challenges, the data is already starting to come in that shows this. The students who were struggling more before are struggling even more greatly now. I mean, the students who were under pressure are under even greater pressure now. So we know that this COVID thing is really causing it. So things like the ALG pod are the things that are going to make all the difference in the world for some of those students. We need to make sure that all students have access to something of that nature.
That's excellent. We just couldn't miss this opportunity to talk about education to the
you're never going to you're not going to have an objection
so
for me if we can talk about making education about students.
Excellent. So now another thing, Proposition 113. National popular vote. We hear it all the time.
Yep.
You know, for national, could you give a little bit of background about what does it mean? Because the last election we hear that Senator Hillary Clinton got more vote than the president, but the president ended up winning. Could you just give a breakdown what's the difference on national popular vote and how does it work at the presidential level?
Sure. So it's complicated.
Yes.
It's a lot of civics, but here's the bottom line on the whole thing. It's a question of whether or not you want your vote to count, or whether you want just a couple population centers in the country to be the place where all the votes happen. So last cycle, Hillary Clinton won the national popular vote by 3 million votes over Donald Trump.
Meaning she had more vote than the president.
She had more votes than the president had.
Okay.
And she won California by 4.3 million votes. So she won by 3 million, and she won California by even more than that. So what that tells us mathematically is, well, the only place you need a campaign would be California and maybe New York City. So when the founders wrote the Constitution, when they created this incredible experiment that we know as the United States of America, they said, big country, lots of different communities. All the communities may have slightly different perspectives on what they need and how they want things to happen. How do we create a system that makes sure when we elect the king, no, we don't have a king in America, when we elect the president, that president will be responsive to all of those communities? And so they came up with this thing called the Electoral College. And they said, well, the way we're going to do it, to make sure that every state has participation in electing this, we're not going to have all the people elect the president. We'll have all the people based on one person, one vote, elect the senators and the congressmen and the state senators and the state representatives. But for the president, we're going to have the states elect. And that way we know that Wyoming, which has a very different appetite and perspective than New York or California, Wyoming has a voice. That Colorado has a voice, Missouri, and all the different communities that represent all the different perspectives will have a voice. So Proposition 113 says, let's do away with that. Let's throw in with a compact where once a certain number of states, more than half of the states, join into this compact, that all of the votes slide to that side of the table, and they will basically move wherever the biggest voting blocks are. I oppose it. I voted against it coming out of the legislature because I think always acknowledging the minority perspective, always acknowledging that there are different ideas coming from different communities, that's critical in the fabric of America. And so I oppose Proposition 113. I voted no on it when I turned in my ballot. I voted no on it when it was in the state Senate, because I don't think at the end of the day, one person, one vote is the right way to elect the president. So did that make sense?
Yes. So now we talk about the popular vote. Now, could you break down the electoral vote and what are those states that qualify for the electoral vote for our viewers to understand?
You bet. And so that's interesting as well. So 50 states right now, and the bigger the state in terms of population, the more electoral votes they have.
Sure.
But here's the trick. There's a disproportionate number of power in some of the smaller states, like Wyoming, Nebraska, Kansas. They get more electoral power, if you will, than a state like New York or California. But it's, I don't even know the numbers. I should know the numbers off the top of my head. I think Wyoming has maybe 3 electoral votes, and California has like 75. So it's dramatically proportional to the population, but not precisely proportional to the population. But it goes back to this idea of making sure that all the states have an opportunity to participate. And what you hear the phrase battleground states. Mm-hmm. So this particular cycle, and it moves around. If you watch presidential elections over the course of history, the battleground states aren't always the same. This cycle, the battleground states are Florida, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Ohio. So that's where, those states have a little bit more engagement in the process than some of the other states. But that moves over time. You will discover other states at other times become what are known as the battleground states, and they have more participation. They have more noise. They don't really have any more participation, but they have more noise and more activity than some of the other states. So it's all about this very nuanced idea of making sure that all the perspectives, even the minority perspectives from the smaller communities, are heard into that conversation, into that debate.
So now, what does it mean to the resident of the state of Colorado now? Is it more like a popular vote count, or is it more like an electoral vote count?
My perspective is if you vote yes on Proposition 113, you're sending your vote to California. If you vote no on the popular vote, the national popular vote, you're keeping your vote in Colorado. That's my perspective.
Okay.
I truly believe it gives Colorado more authority over the process if we vote no on 113. That's my perspective, but there are 2 ways of looking at that.
Yes. So, and the way to see it is if you're going to decide to say we'll elect the president of the United States based on who's going to have the most vote across the United States, period. And knowing that, some state like New York, California have more people resident and they're going to have more vote and count it like that. But again, do your research, and as the senator said, that's his perspective, that's the way he sees it. So the way you see it or the way you're going to see it talking to other people will be different. So another thing that's very important to the community is Proposition 118, Colorado Paid Family and Medical Leave Initiative. And I know that's something that we even have, because as African immigrants, we have a vast majority of our community that are nurses, that are living, working in home care and things like that. Could you break down this proposition for our viewers to understand what is it about and what impact it might have on them?
Sure, absolutely. So what Proposition 118, the Paid Family Medical Leave Insurance Act would do, it creates a statute. So we talked about some of these are being put in the Constitution, some are being put in the law books or the statutes. This one would go in the law books, which means that the legislature can change it. Now, as a footnote to the conversation, the legislature looked at this, and Republicans and Democrats in conversation decided, no, we don't want to move forward with this. So a different, smaller, Earn Some Leave Act was passed, and that seemed to be the political consensus at the time. That was, we were talking earlier about, we come together, look for a common sense approach. What did come out of the legislature was a much smaller version that said you can earn leave over time through your employer. What this does is it comes back and would create a significant, an enormous, I would argue, a behemoth bureaucracy over time, and it would increase everybody's taxes to do it. So what happens is the employee, part of their paycheck, a small part, less than 1%, about 0.5%, and the employer, about 0.5% of the employer, up to 1.2% over time, goes into an account that then will create a government bureaucracy to administrate a medical leave program. The reality is, the way it's written, there are no guardrails, and I'm very concerned that, one, we're creating a bureaucracy that, two, isn't actuarially sound, potentially. We don't know that it's actually going to work out mathematically. More people may need benefits than there is money to provide, so we're creating this need to raise taxes, and I'm concerned, especially with a payroll tax, that when they're taking part of my paycheck, when they're taking part of your paycheck, and they're taking part of the employer's contribution into that paycheck as well, to create something that I don't really have control over, the employer doesn't have control over, I begin to be a little concerned that we're creating yet one more government program that is going to do what most government programs do, and that's get out of hand and not serve the people as well as we wish it would. It's, you know, the old saying is, I'm from the government, I'm here to help you. I'm concerned that this would create that kind of a circumstance. So that's my perspective on it. The better angels, the argument is, no, government works well. It'll be fine. It'll be a great program, and it will create an opportunity for people to pick up some medical leave if they need to have medical leave. My response back to that is, essentially, I'm debating with myself here, did you notice? My response back to that is, most employers, and I will tell you as a former employer, I've got just 2 employees now, I used to have hundreds of employees, I always made sure that I took better care of my team than my competition took care of my team, my employees, because I wanted them to stick around. And so employers who are on their game, doing the best possible job, the employers that will survive, they're providing this kind of service and more to their employees than what the government's going to be able to get them anyway. So I am one who votes no. I voted no on 118, voted no on it in the state Senate, and I have some really significant questions about what this might look like. Having said that, it's up to you.
Yep.
Research it, look into it, see what your perspective is. And I'm always interested in hearing your perspective. If I've missed something, and believe me, I do miss things occasionally,
Yep.
I'm eager to hear about that as well.
And the key thing here is the expectation is not to have all of us agree on one thing, but is to have all of us be educated enough to make a wise decision on issue. So the next thing that I would want us to talk about is Amendment 76, which is something that's very relevant to us, is citizenship qualification of electors. So background, what does it mean? I think, is it something they are lowering the age, increasing the age for elector voters? So what does it mean?
Yeah, so this is one that goes into the Constitution. So this is an amendment to the Constitution as opposed to a statutory change. So it's one of the big, heavy bucket ones. And it's complicated because it deals with a couple of different issues. It would make it clear that somebody under 18 may be able to vote. The reality is, I think, and then it also identifies who may vote, whether you have to be a citizen or not to vote. The reality is, I think that it conflates the two issues. I would have preferred that we deal with them a little bit more clearly. And it essentially imposes through the Constitution on the legislature, it prohibits the legislature from allowing non-citizens or anyone under the 18 years of age to vote. So it's sticking in the Constitution a requirement on the legislature that says they may not make a law that says someone under 18 may vote. So I think, you know, I'm not sure that I was very mature or very thoughtful until I was at least 26, maybe 56. I may not be there yet, but youngsters, we want them to be involved in the process. But at the end of the day, the question is, although Alexander the Great did rule the known world at 12 years old, I'm not certain that 18, 17, 16, 15, 14 is the correct threshold. So this is one where I'm a yes on this because I don't think 17-year-olds necessarily have the wisdom to make a judgment on the vote. So
now a follow-up question on that. On the other side, when we talk about local election in Colorado, so some of the immigrants say, you know, I'm a resident of Colorado, I pay tax, why can't I participate in the election for the school board of directors?
Right.
Because I pay tax, I'm a resident, the decisions that are being made impact me one way or another, why can't I vote?
Yeah, and my response to that is the same that my response always has been, that everyone should be, as they make purchase into their society, as they make purchase into their communities, they become a meaningful and contributing member of their society, they should have the rights that come with that. I've always thought the pathway to becoming a citizen is bulky. I want more people to be finding their way towards citizenship. I think, as you demonstrate a desire to participate, a desire to be meaningful in your community, you should not be unnecessarily constrained. And again, here it's me kicking against bureaucracy. We've created this massive bureaucracy that makes it so difficult to walk through the process. So my response is, when people are demonstrating that they are meaningful participants in the community, we need to give them the authority that comes with that.
Great. So something for you to really think through and consider, because there's two parts in the question. There are things at the federal level where only citizens of the United States of the certain age can vote, but there's the part also at the local election where if you are a resident, you pay your taxes, you are doing exactly thing, and some decisions are being made where you are impacted one way or another. Should you have your voice heard? Should you have your vote counted? That's for you to decide. I usually tend to keep my belief and my things personal because I don't want to influence one way or another.
76, no, this is a key one that your community needs to pay attention to.
Yep.
Absolutely, because as you're becoming more invested in your community, this does speak to your ability to have authority over that community in which you're investing.
Yep. And again, you joining the African Leadership Group weekly update with Senator Lundeen, a friend and part of the family.
That's
also,
kind of you to say.
There's a lot of things we're going to talk about. Another thing that we hear.
We could do this for hours.
I'm telling you.
We've gotten 2 or 3 of the 12 or 14. I mean, I think there's 12.
But another thing I want us to talk about, because we hear the difference between the two parties when it comes to abortion. And there's Proposition 115 that talk about prohibition of an abortion later in pregnancy. Could you give background? What does it entail, and what should the community know about that?
Sure. Proposition 115 does exactly what it says it would do. It prohibits abortion after 22 weeks. So let's put that in context. A typical pregnancy is 40 weeks. So 22 weeks would be a little bit past halfway through the pregnancy. This provides an exception for if the mother's health or life is an immediate threat. There's an exception for that. But beyond that, it goes to great lengths to protect the life of that child, which is still in its mother's womb, but is now at least 22 weeks old. So this is one where I support that simply because I believe that protecting those who are unable to protect themselves is such an important thing to do. This is one of those philosophical things where there's give and take and there's meaningful arguments. I think Proposition 115 has made an effort to provide protection for the mother's health. If the mother's health is at risk, then there's an exemption for that. So my personal perspective, and this is very personal, everybody needs to address this one and figure out what it means to them. Some people have had experiences that bump up against this, and they therefore have an emotional connection to this type of an idea. So it's a very personal decision. My personal decision is I'm a yes vote on that.
Yes, and as the Senator mentioned, it's something very personal, and that's something you will need to look for and be on the lookout for. And again, there's a lot of amendment that out there on the book that we won't have the chance to go over, but please do your research. Reach out to the African Leadership Group if you want to reach out to the Senator Lundeen. And there's a website also. And you want to talk about Proposition 117?
Can I?
Yeah, please. Let's do it.
So 117 is a great example of how you can control your government. Politicians tend to do this game where they change words to give them different meanings. 117 would require the voters to approve state enterprises. And what state enterprises have become is they become a legal fiction when politicians want more taxes and they're afraid to ask the voters for more taxes. They create an enterprise, they call it a fee, and they just start charging the fee, which is actually just a tax. This says that if the state's creating an enterprise and it's going to collect more than 100 million of your dollars over the next 5 years, it has to come to you and say, hey, Are you willing, Mr. and Mrs. Taxpayer, to pay the money to fund this particular enterprise or not? I believe that's a good way to control government, to make government accountable to the people. So I'm a yes on 117. I think that the people should have authority over how the government is making its business, even when it's trying to play fast and loose with words and names to change and get access to more tax dollars by calling them fees.
Yeah, and you know what? And I really look forward to have somebody from the Democratic Party to join us.
And I'd love to have a debate because it would be a good debate.
Yes, and James Coleman, I know he was looking forward to join us today. James had yes, great, and he's also a friend of the community. Really would welcome anybody from the Democratic Party that would like to participate in such a conference.
To potentially federal judgeships, you want to make sure you're really looking at them carefully. And there's good information in the Blue Book on the judges. You can do further research online as well.
And we usually don't see the judge campaigning. Is it a non-campaign position, or
they all assume they're going to get retained because the judiciary is very, very powerful. So this is one of those where, like I said, my bias is do your research. I probably vote no if I don't have the research that says, yes, I want to support that person, simply because they tend to be retained just by inertia. They just get retained year after year after year. So my particular look is I need a good reason to say yes to retain a judge. Just because I'm trying to shift the balance of power. I want the balance of power in the hands of people, and the closest thing to the hands of the people, in my experience, is the legislature. So you've got the executive, which would be in the state would be the governor, you've got the judiciary, all the judges, and you've got the legislature, the three branches of government. The one closest to the people, the member of the House, is elected every 2 years. That's close to the people. Members of the Senate are elected every 4 years. So that's close to the people. I want the power to be in the hands of the legislature more so than the judges, judiciary, or the executive.
So now, what is usually the process if they not retain, or the next judge that's going to be nominated going to go through the same process with the Bible, or?
Well, they would be appointed, the governor appoints. Okay. And then the question becomes, are they retained or not?
Oh, that's great. Well, again, a lot of information, and you try to cover it. Yes,
Colorado Blue Book 2020. Google it if you don't have one.
And where can they get it? They can get it mailed to them, or?
You can at this point. I would not ask for it to be mailed simply because I don't know that it'll get to you in time. I think that the best way is get access to the internet and then go out and then just Google Colorado Blue Book 2020, and it'll give you the link to get to this information. Look at it on your iPhone, your smartphone, your tablet, whatever you might have access to. Go down to the library, wherever you can get at it and look at it online.
Yes, and as you know, we have some vital decision to make for this upcoming election. And one thing we look forward to do here, we're going to have a community forum the day after the election for the community to be at the round table and engage in the conversation, where we're going to end up with.
We're going to be exhausted.
Yeah. Nobody's going to talk. So we will just discuss and talk about those things. Senator Lundeen, it was truly an honor and a pleasure to have you, and valuable information. Last word to the community, word of wisdom, that's what I like to call.
Yeah, my words of wisdom are scant, they're scarce, they're few, because I'm working hard to learn to be wise, and the way that we become more wise is by listening to other people. As I said it early on in this program, is seek first to understand and then to be understood. And so that's why I love Papa sitting down with you, is I want to understand circumstances that I don't see in my daily life, that are not part of my experience. And the only way I can do that is what makes me hopefully a better person in the future, tomorrow, 5 years from today, than I am today. And that's
to educate and inform, because that's something that we should not take for granted. But if we want change, we have to participate and be involved with the change that we want in our life. Thank you so much. He was Papa, President and founder of the African Leadership Group. We'll be back here next Tuesday. And I want to give a shout out to our team, Amadou, Dieng, for always facilitating, and Professor Madiama, wearing so many different hats. And again, as Professor said all the time, the difference of the person you are today and the person you will be tomorrow is the book you read and the people you meet. Amen. Till next time, make it a great day. Thank you.